Would you rather live 100 years in the past or live 100 years in the future? Now, most people are going to straight up say, I would rather live in the future. And to kind of make this more of an interesting question, I'm going to say, would you rather live 100 years in the past, so you were born in 1925 as a rich person, infinite wealth, you're just one of the wealthiest people, or would you rather live as a middle class person in 2125? And it's an interesting question because the lifestyle comparison, is it better to be a middle class person with all those different advancements in the future? Or would it be better to be the top person of the 1920s? Would that be better? And I'm kind of split because I think the lifestyle, honestly, would be relatively similar. Because if you're a middle class person in 2125, if it keeps going at this trajectory, a lot of fun stuff, a lot of really cool stuff that has been invented since 1925, you won't be able to do because you can't afford it. That would just be for the rich elites. If you're born in 1925, a lot of the really crazy stuff, the medical advancements, transportation advancements, sporting, all these cool things, they don't even exist. So to some degree, you're kind of living the same lifestyle. I'm projecting a little bit into the future because we've seen the past, we haven't seen the future. But I think being rich 100 years ago would be pretty similar in terms of quality of life to living in the future. Now, I would add this, kind of my thoughts on what the future would look like. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a mass, however it happens, death of a lot of people in the future. And what I mean by that is I wouldn't be surprised if the population is lower by a large margin. And could that make things better? Probably worse, maybe neutral. I don't know. I guess it would depend on specifically how the people died. Did they die from famine? Did they die from war? Did they die from, a COVID variant or some nonsense like that? So that would be interesting. You go to the future with all these modern inventions, but you're the only person, or there's only 1,000 people. Would that be cool? Would that be terrible? Would it be dangerous? Go back to the past? Be a lot of questions. My answer to this would be, I'm gonna fence sit this one. I'm gonna fence sit this one and say I'm not really sure. Next, would you rather question? Would you rather have 24-hour sunlight, but under 50 degrees year round? So this obviously is nowhere on Earth, but it's 49 degrees or colder, but you've got 24 hours of sunlight, or 9 hours of sunlight but it's over 70. So, and that would be year round. This isn't like this is only during the summer in Alaska or during the winter in Florida. This is year round. So 24 hours of sunlight, but under 50, or 9 hours of sunlight, but over 70. I think I've got to, you know what? This is a tough one because you think the sunlight would be super cool. It would mess up your sleep schedule a lot. And because it would be under 49, that could mean it could get as cold as negative 100. But it's generally going to be cold, this climate. There's not a ton you could do. The sunlight's cool because it's during the summer and you can do stuff. I think a lot of activities, if it's 30 degrees, aren't going to be as fun, even if it's sunny. Now, 9 hours of sunlight over 70, that's more of a real life situation. In Florida during the winter, what do they get, 10, 11 hours of sunlight? So we're kind of doing a more condensed winter version of Florida. I would probably opt for that because I think your circadian rhythm will be better suited to handle the even less daylight with the normal temperatures. Now, I would kind of hate that to be year round. That does kind of suck because both of these are year round. Would you rather be cold with a lot of sunlight year round? I'd probably go 9 hours of sunlight, although it sucks. You'd on the weekends when you're not doing stuff, you'd have kind of a normal condition, and from a sleep standpoint, it would be, I guess, better. Now, would you be really willing? This is another interesting one. Would you be willing to have unlimited money in a random state? So what this means is you can spin a wheel. It's got all 50 states on it. And whatever it lands on, you have to live in that state for the rest of your life. You can't leave for vacation. You can't leave because of a snowstorm. You have to live somewhere within that state. You have to buy groceries. You have to watch. Everything you have to do has to be within that state. You have to go to the hospital in that state. But you get unlimited money. So I would probably do it. There's some states where it's like, man, that's kind of a bummer. If you go to North Dakota or South Dakota, kind of stinks. There's some states where it's like, man, California I think would probably be the best one because a lot of the cool things to do cost a lot of money, and that's why people don't like it. But it's got the southern weather, it's got the northern winters, or I guess northern areas. California's so big, there's so much to do. I think California would be a cool state. Florida would be pretty cool too. Texas, the big states with some variance in climates. California I think would be the ideal one that you could land on. But I would probably do it. I would say even if you end up in Wyoming with unlimited money, I would still say that'd be pretty cool. I'd say so. And if you would do that, let's say you're like, oh, 100%, I would relocate to any state for life for unlimited money. Would you do it for any county? And that's where it gets interesting because, state, you've got a lot of different areas you can live in, unless it's a really small state like Rhode Island where it's just a couple towns. But for the most part, you have a lot of options. But would you do a county? So we've got the 100,000 plus counties in the United States. Would you spin the wheel and be forced to stay in a county? And that one would be really interesting because you might end up in Miami or LA or a cool, mid-sized county that you like. Or you might end up in a county with 1,000 people and you can never leave it. And that gets interesting because now you're having to deal with, you got to get stuff delivered. Is there a hospital there? That could be problematic. And the last question is, would you rather be a greatest of all time athlete at any sport, so whatever your favorite sport is, whether it's football, basketball, boxing, whatever, or would you rather be the president? So you got those two options. You can be the president for 8 years, or you can be the GOAT at your sport. And I'm going to go GOAT athlete. I think GOAT athlete's probably cooler. A lot more people. The president, obviously, if you're the president, you probably have more fans, I guess. But you also have a lot more haters. But I think it'd be cooler to be a Mike Tyson, not saying that he's the GOAT, but to just be an elite athlete. I'd probably lean elite athlete. I think that'd be a cooler thing to do. Obviously, it's not as much work as being a president, and a lot less haters, and it's probably safer.